You know, we always hear about who has power, who's in charge, who's making the moves. But today, we're going to peel back that layer and ask a much deeper question. How is that power built in the first place? We're diving into the hidden blueprints, the master ideas that have built entire empires throughout history. Okay, let's get into it. So, when you think of an empire, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Big armies, right? Gold, trade routes, massive territories? And yeah, that's all part of the picture. But what if the strongest foundations, the ones that last for centuries, aren't made of stone or steel at all? What if they're built out of something you can't even see? An idea. All right, to help us wrap our heads around this, let's borrow a great metaphor from the world of geopolitics. The political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski famously pictured the world as this grand chessboard, with nations as the players. But for our purposes today, we're going to say the most powerful pieces on that board, they aren't the nations. They're the big ideas that tell the nations where to move. So Brzezinski was talking about this big game between players like Russia, China, Germany, and so on. But we're going to take his idea and reframe it just a little. We're not just looking at the players, we're looking at the playbook, the blueprints of belief that allow these players and others all through history to even be on the board. So what do these blueprints actually look like? Well, we're going to start by looking at two totally different kinds of empires, one geopolitical, one religious. And what you're going to see is this surprising, almost spooky similarity in how they use stories and narratives to grow their power. Let's start with the big ones, Rome and China. I mean, Rome obviously had its legions, no question, but its power was also magnetic. People were drawn to the idea of Roman culture. And it was the same with China. Sure, they had this legendary bureaucracy, but a huge part of their influence came from this deep-seated belief in their own cultural superiority. See the pattern here? It's never just about muscle. It's about convincing everyone that your way is the best way. And this isn't just ancient history. Brzezinski makes the exact same point about modern America. He argues its power in the world isn't just about its military or its economy. A massive piece of the puzzle is what he calls the vague but significant cultural appeal of the American way of life. The idea itself becomes a tool of influence. Okay, now let's make a hard pivot. From a global superpower to a religious order. You'd think the Jesuits would run on, faith and prayer alone. But historical sources show they had this incredibly savvy worldly strategy. They didn't just focus on piety. They trained their people in practical skills. They got their members into positions of influence, like advisors to kings. They bent the rules to fit in with local customs. And all the while, power was held tightly at the center. Sound a little like a business plan? The original source actually gives this strategy a name, human policy. It's basically the art of using clever, man-made tactics to get what you want, even if you're a spiritual organization. It's about strategic thinking, not just waiting for divine intervention. It's proof that even systems that claim to be from another world need a very practical, very human blueprint to succeed in this one. So we've seen how these power blueprints work to expand outwards, to influence other people. But what happens when that same kind of strategic thinking gets turned inward? What happens when it's used to control a population within your own borders? This brings us to maybe the most powerful case study of all, how an entire ideology was built in America to protect an economic system and maintain a specific power structure. The historian John Hope Franklin offers this incredibly powerful way to think about it. He says to imagine racist ideas like a virus. It's not just that they're harmful, it's that they are survivors. They can lie dormant, they can spread, and this is the crucial part, they can mutate to look like something else, something more respectable whenever they're threatened. To make the institution of slavery work, you first had to build a story to justify it. And that story was the myth of the uncivilized African. But as historians like Franklin show, it was pure fiction. I mean, look at the reality. West African empires like Ghana and Songhai had complex governments, sophisticated legal systems, and vibrant societies full of skilled craftspeople. The idea of inferiority wasn't something people discovered. It was something they invented. It was a tool designed for a job. Now, get this number. 5,000. That's roughly how many black soldiers fought in the American Revolution. Fought for a new nation's freedom, while their own people were enslaved. That is a massive,
fundamental contradiction right at the very heart of the country's founding. So how on earth do you live with a contradiction like that?
Well, you don't resolve it. You build an entire ideological architecture to hide it. This complex system of racial inferiority wasn't just some vague prejudice. It was a calculated construction project. It had two main goals. First, to justify the brutal economics of slavery. And second, to paper over that impossible contradiction at the nation's core. So what happens when the very system this ideology was built to protect, chattel slavery, is suddenly gone? Does the idea just vanish? Absolutely not. Remember Franklin's virus metaphor? It mutates. After the Civil War, the old power structure felt threatened. So the ideology just changed its shape. It evolved into things like the Black Codes, and later, full-blown Jim Crow segregation. The goal was exactly the same: keep the old hierarchy in place. And this mutation was anything but subtle. As Franklin documents, the Black Codes were basically a legal reconstruction of slavery. They used the law to trap people. For instance, vagrancy laws meant you could be arrested just for not having a job. Contract laws meant if you quit your job, you could be hunted down and arrested for breach of contract. It was a systematic legal cage designed to mimic the control of the old system. Okay, let's take a breath. We've just looked at the cultural blueprint of a global power, the strategic plan of a religious order, and the legal mutation of a racial ideology. On the surface, they look like they have nothing in common. But if you look at the architecture, the blueprints underneath, you start to see the rules of a game that's being played right under our noses. So let's connect all these dots. Geopolitical power, built on the idea of cultural appeal. Religious expansion, built on the idea of strategic human policy. Racial hierarchy, built on the manufactured idea of inferiority. The common thread here is incredible. It seems that all lasting systems of power, the armies, the laws, the economies, that's all just the hardware. The thing that actually runs it all, the operating system, is the software of a powerful, adaptable idea. And that really brings us to the core takeaway. Power isn't something that's just held or won by brute force. Lasting power is designed, it's architected, it's scripted. And once you learn how to spot the script, you start to see the world in a whole new way. So that leaves us with a final question for you. If the world is a grand chessboard, not of nations, but of the ideas that drive us, then the question isn't just what's happening on the global stage. It's about looking at your own life, your own world. What are the master ideas moving the pieces on your chessboard?